Look, I'm not saying the Galactic Council is incompetent. I'm just saying that when they put up a job posting for Human Cultural Ambassador to the Vrexian Empire, they probably should have included a warning label. Something like, "Caution. This position may result in you becoming the unofficial babysitter to a species that considers dismemberment a fun weekend activity." According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. But here we are. The human in question was Marcus Chen, a 32-year-old xenobiologist from Earth who had the kind of resume that made other scientists weep into their peer-reviewed journals. 3 PhDs, 4 published books, and absolutely zero common sense when it came to his own personal safety. Which, as it turns out, made him perfect for this job. The Vrexians were, to put it mildly, terrifying. Imagine if a tiger, a bear, and a particularly angry wolverine had a 3-way fusion dance, and then decided to evolve opposable thumbs and a society. They stood anywhere from 7 to 9 feet tall, had retractable claws that could slice through steel plating like it was warm butter, and jaws that could crush bone with about as much effort as you or I might use to bite into a potato chip. Oh, and their cubs, their adorable, fluffy murder machine cubs, started hunting live prey at around 6 months old. So naturally, the council thought it would be a great idea to send a human to live among them for a cultural exchange program. Marcus arrived on Vrexia Prime on a Tuesday, which he later insisted was cosmically appropriate because Tuesdays were when the universe decided to really mess with people. The spaceport was a massive structure of dark stone and metal that looked less like a transportation hub and more like something designed by someone who really liked the aesthetic of intimidating fortress. His welcoming committee consisted of Ambassador Krellix, a battle-scarred Vrexian with silver-streaked fur and eyes that could freeze hydrogen, and approximately 30 other Vrexians who looked like they were trying to decide whether Marcus would be better served as a colleague or an appetizer. "Welcome to Vrexia Prime, human Marcus," Krellix rumbled, his voice like gravel being poured into a cement mixer. "We are honored to host your species representative." Marcus, to his credit, didn't faint. He also didn't run screaming back to his shuttle, which honestly showed remarkable restraint. Instead, he smiled that peculiar human smile that never quite reached the prey animal nervousness in his eyes and said, "Thank you, Ambassador. I'm looking forward to learning about your culture." What he didn't say was, "and also trying not to die in the process." The first few weeks were an adjustment period. The Vrexians were surprisingly hospitable once you got past the whole looking like they could tear you apart with their bare hands thing. They gave Marcus his own quarters in the diplomatic compound, which was decorated in what he mentally cataloged as early predator, chic, featuring lots of dark surfaces, ambient lighting that seemed designed to create dramatic shadows, and furniture that looked like it had been carved from the bones of large, unfortunate animals. It probably had been. Marcus threw himself into his work with the kind of enthusiasm that made the other human diplomats think he might have a death wish. He attended Vrexian cultural ceremonies, learned their complex social hierarchies, and only accidentally insulted someone's honor 3 times in the first month, which was apparently a new record for non-Vrexian species. He was starting to think he might actually survive this assignment when he met Rixar. Rixar was 7 months old, which in Vrexian terms meant he was roughly equivalent to a human toddler in terms of cognitive development, and roughly equivalent to an industrial wood chipper in terms of destructive capability. He was the youngest cub of warlord Vrexia, one of the most powerful members of the Vrexian High Council, and he had taken an immediate and intense interest in the strange, soft, weak-looking creature that had come to live in his territory. Their first meeting happened in the diplomatic compound's garden, which was less garden and more controlled wilderness, designed to give predators a homey feeling. Marcus was examining some native Vrexian flora, taking notes on his datapad, when he heard a sound behind him. It was a very specific sound. The kind of sound that, in Earth's evolutionary history, meant that something with more teeth than you was getting ready to pounce. Marcus froze. Then, because he was Marcus and his survival instincts had been replaced with scientific curiosity somewhere around his second PhD, he slowly turned around. The cub was crouched about 15 feet away, his adolescent body low to the ground, his amber eyes locked onto Marcus, with the kind of focus that suggested he had just discovered his new favorite toy. His fur was still soft and fluffy with youth, patterned in dark stripes that would help him blend into shadows, and his tail was twitching back and forth with barely contained excitement. Marcus did what any reasonable xenobiologist would do in this situation. He sat down on the ground and made himself a smaller target while pulling out his camera. "Hey there, buddy," he said softly, narrating into his recorder. Subject appears to be a juvenile Vrexian, approximately 7 to 8 months old based on size and dentition development. He's exhibiting classic predatory stalking behavior, which is absolutely fascinating and possibly about to be extremely painful. Vrexa's ears perked up at the sound of Marcus's voice. Then, with the kind of terrible decision-making that was apparently universal among youth of all species, he pounced. Now, a 7-month-old Vrexian cub weighed about as much as a full-grown human adult and had the impact force of a small motorcycle. Marcus went down like he'd been hit by a furry-clawed freight train, his datapad flying off into the bushes as approximately 180 pounds of excited predator landed on his chest. "Oof," Marcus wheezed, which was about all he could manage with his lungs suddenly compressed. Vrexia made a chittering sound that was probably the Vrexian equivalent of delighted laughter, and immediately started doing what cubs do: playing. Which, in this case, meant pouncing on Marcus's arms, batting at his face with paws that still had their claws out. And then, because this story needed to happen eventually, biting down on Marcus's forearm. Here's where things got interesting. Vrexian cubs learned bite inhibition through play with their siblings and parents. When they bit too hard, their playmates would yelp, pull away, and sometimes bite back harder to teach them to be gentle. It was a crucial part of their development. Vrexia bit down on Marcus's arm with what, for a cub, was probably a gentle exploratory nibble. His developing fangs pressed into the soft flesh, his jaw muscles engaged, and he waited for the satisfying feeling of skin breaking and the subsequent yelp of pain that would tell him he'd done it right. Nothing happened. Marcus, who was screaming internally but maintaining scientific objectivity externally, held very still. His arm hurt, sure, but human skin, that weird, elastic, surprisingly tough organ that made up Earth's dominant species' outer layer, just sort of compressed. The teeth pressed in, left deep indentations, but didn't break through. Vrexia pulled back, his head tilted in confusion. He looked at Marcus's arm, then at Marcus's face, then back at the arm. Then he bit down again, harder this time. Still nothing. The skin reddened, sure. It was going to bruise spectacularly, but it didn't break. "Yeah, that's right, you fuzzy little apex predator," Marcus muttered through gritted teeth. "Earth didn't mess around when it came to durability. We evolved from creatures that fell out of trees for fun." Vrexia made a confused chirping sound and bit down a third time, this time with enough force that it would have definitely broken through a Vrexian adult's skin. Human skin, however, with its weird collagen matrix and flexible dermis, just kind of held. The cub sat back on his haunches, looking at Marcus with an expression that could only be described as utterly baffled. His ears flattened against his head, his tail stopped twitching, and he made a small, confused mewling sound that somehow managed to convey the sentiment, "What are you?" "I'm a human," Marcus said, slowly sitting up and examining his arm. It was covered in saliva and deep red marks that would definitely become bruises, but the skin was intact. "We're weird. Also, ow. That actually really hurt. But I need you to know that I'm letting you do this for science." This was, of course, a lie. Marcus had frozen up and simply hadn't had time to pull away, but it sounded better for the recordings. Vrexia, apparently deciding that this required further investigation, tried biting Marcus's hand, then his shoulder, then, in a move that gave Marcus a minor heart attack, his ear. Same result every time. Pressure, pain, indentation, but no breaking. Human skin, it turned out, was significantly tougher than Vrexian skin, at least when it came to puncture resistance. Okay, Marcus finally said, gently pushing the cub away. "That's enough experimentation for today. You're going to give me a bruise collection that'll make me look like I lost a fight with a paint mixer." Vrexia sat back and stared at Marcus with wide, fascinated eyes. Then he did something that Marcus would later describe as both adorable and deeply unsettling. He chirped happily and tackled Marcus again. This became a pattern. Krelix found them an hour later, with Marcus covered in saliva and minor contusions, and Vrexia curled up on his lap, purring like a chainsaw and occasionally gnawing on Marcus's fingers with the kind of determination that suggested he was still trying to figure out the puzzle of the unbiteable human. "Human Marcus," Krelix said slowly, his voice containing notes of confusion and something that might have been concern. "Why are you allowing Warlord Vrexira's cub to use you as a chewing implement?" Marcus looked up, his hair sticking in several different directions and his shirt torn in 3 places. "Science," he offered. Krelix stared at him for a long moment. Then he made a sound that Marcus would later learn was the Vrexian equivalent of a weary sigh. "Humans," he muttered, and walked away. Word spread quickly through the diplomatic compound. The human, that strange, soft creature that everyone had been carefully not threatening because of diplomatic protocols, had apparently let a cub bite him repeatedly and come out with nothing but bruises. This was unusual. This was concerning. This was, as one Vrexian warrior put it, either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, and I'm not sure which option is more disturbing. Warlord Vrexia herself came to speak with Marcus the next day. She was a massive Vrexian, even by their standards, with scars that told stories of battles won and enemies defeated. Her presence in a room could make hardened warriors reconsider their life choices. She found Marcus in his quarters, writing up his notes from the previous day's experiment, with Vrexia curled up on his couch, napping. "Human," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Explain why my cub has become obsessed with you." Marcus looked up from his datapad. He had learned, over his weeks on Vrexia Prime, that the worst thing you could do with a Vrexian was show fear. The second worst thing was to lie. So he went with option 3, absolute honesty delivered with complete sincerity. "Your son bit me repeatedly yesterday and couldn't break my skin. I think he's fascinated because it violated his understanding of how living things work. Also, I may have inadvertently taught him that I'm an acceptable toy, which in hindsight was poor judgment on my part." Vrexia stared at him, Her claws, each as long as Marcus's fingers, flexed slightly. Then she did something Marcus didn't expect. She laughed. It was a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to come from somewhere in her chest cavity and filled the entire room. "He bit you multiple times and failed to draw blood?" "Yes, ma'am." "Show me." Marcus rolled up his sleeve, revealing the spectacular collection of bruises that had developed overnight. They were deep purple and yellow, arranged in perfect dental-patterned semicircles up and down his forearm. Vrexia leaned in, examining them with professional interest. "These are from Riksar's bite?" "Yes, ma'am. He tried several times. Different angles, different pressure. Nothing broke the skin." The warlord sat back, her expression thoughtful. "Human skin is this durable?" "Compared to Vrexian skin? Apparently, yes. We don't heal as fast as you do, and we're not as strong, but our skin is surprisingly resistant to puncture wounds. Evolutionary pressure from, falling down a lot and getting scraped up by our environment. This was a simplification, but Marcus figured the warlord didn't need a lecture on human evolutionary biology right now." Vrexia looked at her sleeping cub, then back at Marcus. "He has been difficult to train in bite inhibition. His siblings are all older and no longer patient with his roughness. The trainers have tried, but he is stubborn." She paused. "If you are willing, you could help teach him." Marcus's brain, the part that was supposed to keep him alive, screamed, "No, absolutely not. This is a terrible idea." His mouth, which was apparently not connected to his brain, said, "I'd be honored." And that's how Marcus Chen became the official bite training dummy for a Vrexian cub. The arrangement was bizarre, even by the standards of interspecies diplomacy. Every afternoon, Marcus would meet with Vrexia in the garden, and the cub would practice his hunting and playing behaviors on the one creature he couldn't easily damage. Marcus wore thick clothing, kept a medical kit nearby just in case, and documented everything for his research. Vrexia learned quickly. When he bit down on Marcus and didn't get the pain response he expected, Marcus would make a noise, a short, sharp "ah" that signaled that was too hard. Then he'd pull away for a moment, teaching the cub that biting too hard meant playtime stopped. It was essentially the same method Vrexian parents used, just adapted for a species that apparently had skin made of flexible leather. The other Vrexians watched this process with a mixture of fascination and bewilderment. Humans, they were learning, were strange. Humans were soft and weak and slow, yes, but they were also weirdly durable in unexpected ways, and apparently had a death wish that manifested as scientific curiosity. Marcus became something of a celebrity in the compound. Warriors would stop him in the halls to examine his latest collection of bruises. Diplomats would ask him questions about human pain tolerance. One elderly Vrexian, a historian named Velimoth, spent an entire afternoon interviewing him about human evolutionary adaptations and came away muttering about persistence predators and endurance hunters, and no wonder they made it to space. Vrexia, for his part, became oddly protective of Marcus. When other Vrexians approached too quickly or with too much aggression, the cub would position himself between them and the human, his small body tense and his lips pulled back in a juvenile snarl that said, "This is my weird chew toy. Get your own." It was, Marcus noted in his recordings, disturbingly cute and also potentially concerning from a diplomatic standpoint. 3 months into this arrangement, something happened that would become legend in both Vrexian and human diplomatic circles. There was a gathering, a formal event where the Vrexian High Council met with representatives from various allied species. Marcus was there in his capacity as human cultural ambassador, wearing his formal diplomatic attire and trying not to think about how much he'd rather be back in the garden with Vrexia. The meeting was going well until one of the representatives, a Kaltorian named Jex, who had a well-known dislike for humans, made a disparaging comment about Earth species being soft prey animals playing at civilization. The room went quiet. Krelix began to formulate a diplomatic response. Thexara's claws extended slightly, a sign of displeasure. And then Vrexia, who had been napping in the corner of the room because Vrexian cubs were apparently allowed in formal government functions, woke up and padded over to Marcus. The cub looked at Jex, then at Marcus, then back at Jex. Then he did something that made every Vrexian in the room go completely still. He bit Marcus. Not a playful nibble. A real bite, with force behind it. The kind of bite a cub uses when something threatens their family. He clamped down on Marcus's forearm, his developing fangs pressing into the flesh with enough pressure that several of the alien representatives gasped, expecting to see blood. Marcus didn't move. He'd learned over the past months that sudden movements during a bite could actually make things worse. He just stood there, letting the cub prove his point. 5 seconds passed. 10. 15. Vrexia released his grip and sat back, looking at Jex with an expression that clearly said, "See? Not so soft." Marcus looked down at his arm. There were deep indentations, sure. It was going to bruise spectacularly, adding to his already impressive collection. But the skin hadn't broken. He looked up at Jex and smiled. "You were saying something about soft?" The Kaltorian representative stared, his 3 eyes wide with shock. "That was a juvenile Vrexian war bite. That should have taken your arm off." "Should have, didn't," Marcus said cheerfully. "Humans are weird like that. We're not as strong as most species. We're not as fast. We don't have natural weapons. But we're persistent, we're durable, and we're really, really hard to kill." He paused. "Also, we make friends with apex predators, apparently." Vrexia chirped happily and leaned against Marcus's leg, purring. The meeting ended shortly after that, with Jex making a hasty exit and the other representatives looking at Marcus with newfound respect and possibly a touch of fear. Thexara approached Marcus after everyone had left. "That was well handled, human Marcus." "Thanks, though I didn't really do anything except stand there and not bleed." "Exactly." The warlord's eyes gleamed with something that might have been amusement. "You have taught my son an important lesson. Strength is not only in claws and fangs. Sometimes it is in knowing what you can endure." Marcus scratched Vrexia behind his ears, earning another purr. "He's a good kid. He just needed someone who could handle his energy. Few creatures could, even among my own species." Thexara was quiet for a moment. "The council has been discussing your position here. There has been some debate about whether humans are suitable for long-term diplomatic placement among our kind." Marcus's heart sank. "I understand if you want me to leave." "Leave?" Thexara snorted. "Human Marcus, the council has voted unanimously to request a permanent human presence in our diplomatic corps. You have shown us that your species has qualities we had not anticipated. Durability, patience, the ability to teach our young without fear." She paused. "Also, Vrexia will be devastated if you go, and he is already planning to enter the warrior caste when he comes of age. It would be unwise to upset him." Marcus blinked. "You want me to stay? Permanently?" "If you are willing. Though I should warn you, Vrexia has 3 younger siblings who will be of training age within the year. They will also need someone to teach them bite inhibition." Marcus looked down at his collection of bruises, thought about the past 3 months of being used as a chew toy by an increasingly large and powerful predator cub, and considered the very real possibility that he might spend the next several years of his life as a living teething ring for baby apex predators. "Yeah," he said, "I can do that." Krelix, who had been listening from the doorway, made that weary sighing sound again. "Humans," he muttered. The story of Marcus Chen and Rixar spread throughout the Galactic Council like wildfire. Humans, those strange persistence predators from the little blue planet, had found their niche in the galactic community. Befriending species that most others feared, enduring conditions that would break other races, and apparently serving as evolutionary chew toys for alien apex predators. Other species watched this development with interest and concern. The Vrexians, those terrifying warriors who had been respected and feared throughout the galaxy, had adopted humans as trusted companions. What did that say about humanity? It said that humans were weird. It said that humans were tough in strange, unexpected ways. It said that humans would absolutely let a baby predator chew on them if it meant making friends and learning something new. It said that humanity, wasn't about being the strongest or the fastest or having the biggest guns. Sometimes it was about being the one dumb enough to make friends with something that could kill you, patient enough to teach it not to, and tough enough to survive the learning process. Marcus Chen stayed on Vrexia Prime for 15 years. He trained not just Rixar and his siblings, but dozens of other cubs. He became one of the most respected non-Vrexian figures in their society, known affectionately as the one who does not bleed. He published 17 papers on Vrexian development and behavior. He wrote 3 books that became standard reading in xenobiology programs across human space. His arms and legs were permanently covered in a patchwork of scars and old bruises that never quite faded. A map of every cub he'd helped raise. And Rixar, that curious cub who had first discovered that the strange, soft human couldn't be bitten, grew up to become one of the greatest warriors in Vrexian history. He wore a small pendant around his neck, a gift from Marcus, and told anyone who asked the same story. "When I was young, I tried to bite a human. I learned that some things cannot be broken by force. Some things endure. The human taught me this. He taught all of us." It became a saying among the Vrexians, passed down through generations. Be like the human. Bend, but do not break. Endure, but do not yield. And when something tries to bite you, let it learn that you are tougher than you look. Back on Earth, Marcus's story inspired a new generation of xenobiologists and diplomats. Young humans would watch the recordings of him sitting calmly while a Vrexian cub gnawed on his arm and think, "Yeah, I could do that." Most of them were wrong, but some of them weren't. And that's how humanity earned its place among the stars. Not by being the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced, but by being just crazy enough to make friends with monsters and just tough enough to survive it. Also, apparently, by having really, really good skin. The Galactic Council eventually updated their job posting for Human Cultural Ambassador to High-Risk Species. The new version included a warning label that read, "Caution. This position may result in becoming an evolutionary chew toy. Applicants should have high pain tolerance, excellent bruise healing capabilities, and a complete disregard for their own safety. Prior experience with large predators preferred but not required. Medical insurance provided. Applications flooded in within hours, because humans, as it turned out, were absolutely the kind of species that would see may result in becoming an evolutionary chew toy. And think, cool, where do I sign up? And that, dear reader, is why every Vrexian diplomatic compound now has at least one human on staff, and why humanity's unofficial motto in the Galactic Council is, "We're not strong, we're not fast, but we're really hard to kill and will befriend anything. Even things with more teeth than sense. Especially things with more teeth than sense. Because that's just how humans are. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go document the case of Ambassador Jennifer Park, who is currently teaching bite inhibition to a litter of Crithian void hunters whose adults can bite through starship hulls. She's doing fine. She's only broken 3 bones so far. That's considered good progress.